if a student indicates to me that they've been harmed, if they're fearful of being harmed, if they are being neglected, which may mean anything from not being fed to a parent kicking a student out of the house when the student is still a minor, or if there is something that I feel like is questionable that might be unhealthy for a student, is when I would call to report. So I guess that would be my opinions of abuse. And of course, the abuse can be emotional abuse, which could be just words. It could be a physical abuse, which there's actually bodily harm, and then there's sexual abuse, where a child has been taken advantage of by someone usually older than they are.
I think child abuse is anytime someone is taking advantage of a child, whether it's emotionally, physically, emotionally. It's putting them in an uncomfortable situation, especially when someone has power over someone else, whether that's an adult to child relationship, a parent or a teacher, or it could be an older sibling. When they're using their advantage, whether it's a physical or mental advantage, to make the student or the child feel uncomfortable in any way or form.
Child abuse, I feel like, is neglect or abandonment, basically, of a child, or physical, mental hurts, pain.
Where kids are being taken advantage of or being hurt by their loved ones, or like people around them that they thought they could trust but really can't.
Child abuse, in my opinion, is mistreatment of a child, anything that would cause psychological or emotional damage, even physical damage to a child.
I think child abuse is when adults, even the seed of taking advantage of someone who is a minor, and that abuse could be through verbal, it could be through physical, it could be through sexual, but there is a notion that adolescents and children deserve to be safe and live in a safe home.
Anything that hinders a child's progress, makes them feel bad about themselves, causes harm to them, or kind of puts them on the wrong path, that's abuse, because parents can leave their child at home even though they have a house, food, all that. They haven't had the emotional connection. So that further along their life, that kind of hinders them in some type of way. So just in various areas, that's what child abuse is.
I think the warning signs of child abuse look different for different individuals, and so it's really important for children to have relationships with healthy adults, whether that be at school, a coach in a sports program, a church, and so that adults are able to look and say, that child, there's something going on with that child. And again, that may look extremely different from one child to another. For one child, they may shut down and just kind of no longer talk or no longer engage in normal dialogue. For another student or another child, it could be that they begin to act really rambunctiously. So I think the key for teachers or staff members or principals to recognize child abuse is for them to have relationships and get to know the students on their caseloads.
I work at Children's Hospital in the emergency room, as well as here at Fulton, and we do unfortunately see a lot of kids who have been abused, both physically, sexually, emotionally. Some of the things that you might look for: unexplained bruising. There are several diseases that you might see that would cause bruising, but just for the most part, random bruising with no explanation is something you could see. Injuries that look like an object, for example, coins, cigarette burns, if you see like little pinpoint injuries on a child. And I've seen an iron, unfortunately, before, an iron burn. If a child has a broken bone and the story that is given in the emergency room of what happened doesn't match up with the type of injury or the type of fracture, that would definitely be a sign of child abuse. Also, too, kids, when they are scared to answer questions from healthcare workers, That can also be a sign. If they're afraid to answer when they're asked a question and the parent jumps right in and covers for the child and doesn't allow the child time to answer the question, that can be, one sign of it. If we're talking about sexual abuse, something you might see is, especially young children, if they have gifts that come out of nowhere that are unexplained, you don't know who they came from. If they talk about an adult, you're like, who is that? That can be a sign that, predators will use grooming, and they'll kind of do things to lure kids, candy, gifts, things like that. Also, if you have clothing that goes missing with your child, underwear, shorts, things like that, that can be a sign of sexual abuse.
Usually withdrawal is the biggest when they start withdrawing away from their friends, from people. Appearance has a lot to do with it. Part of the reason that I speak to people every day and just say hello. If you talk to me one time when you're in a good mood, I can tell when that mood has changed. And so mood is usually that way as well. When you kind of see them, a lot of things frustrates or agitates them. Usually there's an underlying reason for a behavior. So what ends up happening is you can kind of pinpoint it. If you keep talking to a kid long enough, you can tell if there's some type of emotional or verbal or physical abuse that's happening.
Physical abuse, like their body and stuff, the way they see things, their perspective of life, I feel their mentality.
Like, for example, if I worked in an elementary school versus working in a high school, because of what you see, what kids will tell, a lot of times smaller children tend to talk more, and you can ask them a couple questions, and just out of innocence, they'll tell you the answer. And a child might say, my daddy got mad and hit me, or, oh, that's nothing, and they may be real strange acting about it, and a teacher maybe has seen bruises over and over again, things of that nature. In high school, it's more what is heard or what is seen versus what you know. Because most high school students have a real hard time admitting it because they know. By the time you're in high school, you know that an adult, by law, which I am bound by law, as are all educators, to call DCS, Department of Children's Services, when abuse is suspected. So by the time a student's in high school, they know that an adult's going to have to tell, so they're not as quick to tell. If it were a student concerned about a peer, concerned about a friend, I would ask them questions like, what makes you think that there's abuse? What has she told you that makes you think there's abuse? And then if they tell me things that I think are, vital, legitimate, then that student can call, I can call if need be, or whatever, but someone would need to, to make that call. So, warning signs, I'm not so sure. It's more what you hear. If I know a student, if I ask a student, for example, are you afraid to go home? And if a student says, yeah, there's no way I'm going home, not after what he said, not after what happened, then obviously there's a concern that I'm going to have to express to someone.
Some kids may be down a lot. Some kids may have bruises on them, or maybe not talking to no one around them.
Warning signs of child abuse could be obviously physical markings. If someone's been hurt, bruising and things of that nature. You could also have a change in a child's behavior. With they're all of a sudden they're an outgoing person who becomes much more quiet and more inward-facing. You could see, a loss of appetite, a lot of anxiety. Someone who's, if they get scared easily by loud sounds and noise, things of that nature. I think this probably the scariest thing is to realize that a lot of times there is no sign of child abuse. So you don't see what's going on. That child's able to mask that as one of their defense mechanisms.
First of all, be on the lookout for it and look for those signs that you might be able to pick up on. I have training because I'm a healthcare worker, but just knowing those things that are could possibly be a red flag. Pick up on it. Don't ignore it, even if there's a chance that it's not actually, going on, let an adult know, so they can go through the proper resources and channels to get that student help. And then also providing counseling through the proper channels. And a lot of times our guidance counselors will know those. Social workers can be helpful with that too. Everything has to be reported to DCS, of course, and then they'll do an investigation. And so really I think the biggest thing is just not ignoring it. Don't say, oh, their parent wouldn't do that or their babysitter wouldn't do that, because what's the statistics is that 1 in 4 children are victims of sexual abuse, and that's not something that is easy to heal from, so it can affect the rest of their life. So it's very important to try to catch it early.
You can go to your counselor, your close friend, or like Food City. They have safe places and other places for kids who are being abused.
I think the first thing that a community can do is kind of put their arms around that the person who was abused, it is not their fault. And to hear that from multiple different people, whether that is from another family member, whether that's from their counselor, but I think a lot of people who are abused, whether they are children or even maybe women my age, is that people feel like I did something wrong and it's my fault. And if as a community, Knoxville, Fulton High School could even just take on that little piece that it is not your fault, I think that could have a big impact with folks who have been abused.
I think we can raise awareness of what child abuse looks like in the warning signs of those, and I think we need to make sure that when incidents come up that we address those. We can't blow it off. I always say we got to err on the side of the child. If we think something's going on, we need to report that. We can't worry about what the adult might think in that situation. Our job is to take care of kids first. So if we're going to make a mistake, let's make a mistake with the adult is the one who's in harm's way, not the child.
As a whole, I feel like like adults or staff members of schools could try to be more involved in students or children's lives, basically like a caseworker or, someone just to check up on kids and stuff whenever they need it.
As a community, I guess one thing is, it'd be one thing from a friend to a friend, how to help a friend. There's not a lot a child or a student can do for another student. Be a good friend and listen and let an adult know.
As a community, that's a good question. For the simple fact that a lot of people, things that happen in your house usually stay in your house, which is a good thing, and sometimes it's a bad thing when it comes to abuse. As a community, the awareness part is really big, and teaching students the difference between what is abuse and what's not abuse. Because just like bullying, we do that whole thing, everybody's bullying. Well, bullying actually has a definition, something that occurs over a period of time, something that shows a pattern. And so the education part for students and for adults is very important for the simple fact of if you don't know how to recognize signs, or better yet, know the difference between what it is and what it's not, we kind of, a great way of bastardizing it, of what abuse is, because then we started claiming everything is abuse.
My name's Alexis Thomas, and this is my story. When I was in 3rd grade, I was sexually abused by my grandfather. Before telling anyone, I felt really alone and like I didn't mean anything. And soon after getting sexually abused, I told my mom what was going on, and we talked to DCS and got me into some therapy. After this, I thought the line of abuse was over, but it soon told me wrong. I was then sexually abused by my stepdad for 3 years before telling anyone. And I told someone because my sister was also sexually abused. Before telling anyone, my depression went up, my anxiety went up, and I was diagnosed with PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder, which is mostly found in men who are in the Army or Armed Forces. Then after that, we got some help and told the police, DCS, Child Services, and Children's Hospital and Child Help. If you or anyone you know is being abused, sexually, emotionally, or physically, please contact Mobile Crisis or DCS.